L'IA générative et marketing sont-ils compatibles? La question de savoir si l'IA va tuer le marketing peut sembler éculée, et pourtant, elle est sur toutes les lèvres dans la profession. Thomas Husson, vice-président et analyste principal chez Forrester Research, basé à Paris, étudie depuis des années le carrefour entre marketing, technologie et comportement des consommateurs sur les marchés européens. Dans un entretien de fond, il démonte le paradoxe européen autour de l'IA générative, l'éternel fossé entre DSI et directeur marketing, l'écart entre l'enthousiasme d'époque et la réalité de la mise en production, et la question épineuse de ce que l'IA signifie concrètement pour la prochaine génération de marketeurs. Ces réponses sont mesurées, parfois directes, toujours ancrées dans les données de Forrester Research.
Des interviews, des chiffres, des faits, des études. Pas de blabla, ce sont les podcasts de Visionary Marketing disponibles sur toutes les bonnes chaînes de balado-diffusion.
Bonjour et bienvenue dans les podcasts de Visionary Marketing. Le sujet du jour, l'IA ne sonnera pas le glas du marketing, avec Thomas Husson de Forrester Research. Ma première question à Thomas était la plus évidente. Les directeurs marketing vont-ils être rendus obsolètes par l'intelligence artificielle? La réponse de Thomas Husson est sans ambiguïté et mérite d'être posée d'emblée clairement. C'est un non catégorique. Le rôle va évoluer, les méthodes vont changer, mais l'existence même du marketing en tant que discipline n'est pas, selon lui, en jeu. Cela dit, Thomas Husson ne se fait aucune illusion sur les pressions qui s'accumulent peu à peu au sein des organisations marketing. Certaines tâches seront automatisées, c'est incontestable. Les vraies questions sont lesquelles, à quel rythme, et si l'automatisation d'une tâche condamne nécessairement le métier qui l'entoure. Sa réponse à cette dernière question est non, du moins pas de façon aussi mécanique qu'on pourrait le croire. Les emplois vont évoluer, nous dit-il, c'est certain. De nouveaux emplois vont être créés, la plupart des métiers vont changer. Notre façon de travailler va aussi changer. La façon dont nous travaillons avec les agences, avec les partenaires externes, les processus, les flux de travail. C'est la forme du travail qui se transforme, nous dit-il, pas le travail lui-même. Pour ceux qui espéraient un verdict plus tranché, la lecture de Thomas Husson peut sembler décevante. Mais elle reflète ce que les données de Forrester Research montrent réellement. Elle pointe aussi vers le défi pratique le plus important pour l'IA, comme pour les directeurs marketing, à savoir gérer une transformation profonde sans tomber dans le catastrophisme ni s'y laisser porter les yeux fermés. Une étude de Forrester a livré un résultat qui, à première vue, semble contradictoire, comme Thomas l'a souligné lors de notre entretien. 55% des marketeurs B2B européens estiment en effet que l'IA générative est surestimée. Et pourtant, 81% des praticiens du marketing en Europe se décrivent comme enthousiastes à son égard. Comment les deux peuvent-ils être vrais en même temps? Thomas explique ce paradoxe sans difficulté. Le scepticisme des décideurs est parfaitement rationnel. L'IA est omniprésente dans les conférences, les argumentaires commerciaux et la couverture médiatique. Il y a une fatigue de l'IA, nous dit Thomas. Et surtout, certains éditeurs en font vraiment trop. Et les gains de productivité qu'ils promettent ne sont tout simplement pas au rendez-vous, a-t-il déclaré. L'écart entre le discours et ce que l'on vit réellement sur le terrain est suffisamment grand pour engendrer une frustration bien légitime. Mais ceux qui utilisent vraiment ces outils, souvent officieusement, ont un tout autre vécu. Ils gagnent du temps et font leur travail différemment. Ils découvrent des capacités auxquelles ils ne s'attendaient pas. À court terme, tout est surestimé, poursuit Thomas, y compris le nombre de suppressions d'emplois. À long terme, les choses sont sous-estimées, parce que l'IA sera liée à d'autres technologies, et oui, elle va réinventer beaucoup de choses. C'est une reformulation précise de la loi d'Amara. Roy Amara, ancien président de l'Institute for the Future, avait observé que nous avons tendance à surestimer l'impact à court terme des nouvelles technologies et à en sous-estimer l'impact à long terme. La citation est souvent attribuée à tort à Bill Gates, mais Thomas Husson prend soin de rétablir la paternité exacte de cette citation. Il l'applique directement à la conversation sur l'IA et les directeurs marketing. Le bruit à court terme noie un signal à long terme bien plus important. Interrogé sur ce que le long terme signifie concrètement à l'heure de l'accélération de l'IA, Thomas a été précis, sans doute plus proche de 5 à 7 ans que de 10 ou 15, nous dit-il, mais pas pour demain pour autant. L'enquête State of AI Survey 2025 de Forrester Research contient un chiffre qui mérite bien plus d'attention qu'il n'en reçoit. Les organisations européennes accusent un retard sur leurs homologues non européennes dans l'usage en production de l'intelligence artificielle générative. 62% contre 72%. L'écart ne se situe pas dans l'expérimentation, nous dit-il, il est dans le passage à l'acte. La réglementation est l'explication la plus souvent avancée et Thomas la balaye avec sa franchise habituelle. L'AI Act est une contrainte réelle, mais ce n'est pas la cause principale du déficit de mise en production en Europe. Il fonctionne, selon lui, comme une excuse à double tranchant. Les pionniers affirment qu'il les empêche d'avancer assez vite, tandis que les organisations frileuses s'en servent pour justifier leur immobilisme. Ni l'une ni l'autre de ces positions ne résistent à l'examen, selon lui. Le problème de fond est organisationnel et culturel. Les entreprises américaines et chinoises pensent global dès le premier jour, tandis que les entreprises européennes, notamment les plus grandes, continuent de fonctionner marché par marché. La France d'abord, puis le Royaume-Uni, puis l'Allemagne. L'ambition est calibrée différemment. Il existe également un défi structurel autour du financement et de la capacité à passer à l'échelle. Cela dit, la France, le Royaume-Uni et l'Allemagne arrivent en tête de l'adoption parmi les pays européens dans les données de Forrester Research. Le problème pour ces marchés de tête n'est pas de savoir s'ils utilisent l'IA générative. 28% des décideurs marketing B2B européens ne parviennent pas à l'identifier clairement ou l'appliquer. Ils ont l'outil, il leur manque la stratégie. Ce n'est pas utiliser l'IA pour elle-même, mais comment est-ce que j'utilise l'IA pour servir mes objectifs marketing? C'est la question, la seule qui vaille, nous dit Thomas. Il préconise de petits projets IA ciblés avec un retour sur investissement transparent comme moyen de créer une dynamique et de démontrer des résultats. Quand on lui demande si cela ne risque pas de maintenir l'organisation dans une logique purement incrémentale, il concède le point sans détour. Si vous ne faites que de petits projets ciblés, ce sera incrémental et pas suffisamment ambitieux. Il faut les inscrire dans une vision et une feuille de route, nous dit-il. La productivité est le premier moteur de l'adoption IA dans l'enquête State of AI Survey 2025 de Forrester Research. C'est aussi, selon Thomas, la métrique la plus exposée à l'inflation des éditeurs. Dans les modélisations de Forrester Research, un facteur de conversion de 50% est appliqué aux annonces de gains de productivité des fournisseurs. Si un outil fait gagner 1 heure, l'avantage réaliste en productivité est d'environ 30 minutes de production supplémentaire. Ce n'est pas un ajustement marginal. Cela divise par 2 les chiffres annoncés en grande pompe à la une des journaux que les éditeurs publient régulièrement. Il faut appliquer une des cotes au discours des éditeurs quand ils annoncent 40, 50, 80, 100% de gains de productivité, nous dit-il. Des gains, il y en a, mais ils ne sont pas aussi élevés qu'on pourrait le croire. Il y a aussi une dimension de motivation que les modèles prennent rarement en compte. Quand le travail devient plus facile à produire, il peut aussi devenir moins engageant à réaliser. L'effort cognitif qui nourrissait jusqu'ici la concentration et la satisfaction disparaît en partie avec des conséquences sur la qualité et l'implication qu'aucune présentation d'éditeur ne prend en considération. Le fossé entre DSI et directeur marketing est un thème récurrent dans les discussions sur les technologies marketing. Les données de Forrester Research suggèrent que l'écart au niveau des dirigeants s'est réduit, en partie grâce aux collaborations nées pendant la période post-Covid. Mais au niveau des équipes, les tensions persistent et les données sur la gouvernance de l'IA sont saisissantes. Les directeurs marketing ne représentent que 8 à 10% des pilotes de la stratégie IA dans les organisations. Dans la grande majorité des cas, c'est le DSI ou le CTO qui pilote le déploiement de l'IA. Thomas Husson comprend la logique. Gouvernance des données, sécurité, scalability, ce sont des préoccupations légitimes, mais il estime que cette façon de faire est erronée. C'est exactement la même erreur qui s'est produite avec la transformation digitale, nous dit-il. L'IA doit être au service d'abord du client et par conséquent des fonctions métiers qu'il servent. Il y a un décalage beaucoup trop important entre une plateforme IA sécurisée et scalable d'un côté et des besoins des marketeurs des autres. La conséquence structurelle de cette dynamique est prévisible. Quand le DSI contrôle les outils et que les directeurs marketing n'ont pas ce dont ils ont besoin, le shadow AI prolifère. Plus le DSI verrouille la plateforme officielle, plus les équipes multiplient les solutions non officielles. C'est un cercle vicieux qui accroît le risque de gouvernance tout en donnant l'illusion du contrôle. Le paysage Martech aggrave encore le problème. Selon les données citées par Thomas Husson, 2500 nouvelles solutions IA ont été ajoutées au marché en 1 an, tandis que 1211 outils pré-IA étaient retirés. Évaluer ce paysage exige une expertise transversale qu'aucun directeur marketing ni aucun DSI ne possède seul. La nécessité d'une véritable collaboration plutôt que la coexistence polie qui en tient lieu dans la plupart des organisations n'a jamais été aussi forte. Les données de l'enquête sur l'emploi sont préoccupantes. 57% des décideurs marketing terrain en Europe estiment que l'adoption de l'IA entraînera des suppressions de postes dans leurs équipes. 68% affirment que de nouveaux rôles seront créés. L'espace entre ces deux chiffres, c'est là que vit la vraie inquiétude. Pour une perspective plus large sur l'impact de l'IA sur l'emploi, y compris les prévisions de Forrester Research pour les États-Unis, voire notre article précédent, AI Job Impact in the US, the Apocalypse Can Wait. Pour une vision à plus long terme de la façon dont l'IA générative remodèle les métiers, voire aussi Gen AI Impact on Jobs. Les centres de contact et l'exécution des tâches marketing de base enregistrent déjà un impact mesurable. Les agences subissent une pression visible. Mais Thomas revient sans cesse sur la distinction entre automatisation des tâches et suppression des emplois. La plupart des pertes d'emplois ne sont pas encore directement imputables à l'IA et le tableau demande de la nuance, pas de l'alarmisme. Sur les nouveaux rôles, la réponse la plus juste est qu'il est difficile de les nommer avant même qu'ils apparaissent. Il y a 20 ans, personne ne recrutait de community manager. Les emplois qui émergeront de la transformation actuelle seront tout aussi difficiles à anticiper. Ce que Thomas dit en revanche, c'est que travailler avec des agents intelligents, gérer leur production et comprendre leurs limites deviendra une compétence fondamentale, non plus une spécificité réservée à quelques-uns. Quant à ses conseils aux professeurs et intervenants du marketing pour leur renseignement, ils sont très clairs également. Apprenez-leur les bases du marketing, elles ne changeront pas. Insufflez beaucoup plus de sciences humaines traditionnelles, éthique, émotion, anthropologie. Ces dimensions vont gagner en importance, nous dit-il. La curiosité aussi. Et ils doivent utiliser ces outils, apprendre à s'en servir pour pouvoir développer leur sens critique. Il y a une ironie dans ce conseil que Thomas reconnaît implicitement. Les métiers du digital seront probablement les premiers touchés par l'automatisation induite par l'IA, précisément parce qu'ils sont déjà les plus numérisés. Les dimensions analogiques du marketing, qui semblaient les plus vulnérables à la disruption digitale, se révèlent plus résistantes que prévu. L'IA est la suite de la transformation digitale, pas une rupture avec elle. Cette conversation a également mis en lumière un problème structurel non entièrement résolu. Si les organisations réduisent les recrutements en entrée de carrière pour comprimer les coûts et que ces postes constituaient le vivier de formation traditionnelle de la prochaine génération, alors le processus d'apprentissage itératif qui forge l'expertise senior est en train d'être rompu. L'IA peut enseigner beaucoup de choses, mais la dimension sociale de l'apprentissage aux côtés d'un collègue au fil du temps ne se réplique pas facilement. Une idée reçue veut que l'enthousiasme pour l'IA générative en marketing soit avant tout un phénomène B2C. Thomas Husson conteste cela fermement. Dans son analyse, les marketeurs B2B sont en réalité en avance dans plusieurs domaines, notamment la génération de contenu, la personnalisation et l'aide à la vente dans les processus d'achat complexes impliquant de multiples parties prenantes. Ce que le B2B découvre aussi, c'est que la distinction tranchée entre une prise de décision B2B rationnelle et un engagement B2C émotionnel est moins solide qu'on ne le suppose généralement. Quand un groupe d'acheteurs prend une décision aux conséquences professionnelles significatives, l'émotion n'est pas absente. Elle est structurée différemment et, à certains égards, engage davantage. Ce n'est pas le humain plus IA, blablabla, qu'on entend à longueur de journée, nous dit Thomas. Il faut une approche plus nuancée. Au fond, l'IA cherche à répliquer le cerveau humain, mais on ne sait pas vraiment comment fonctionne le cerveau humain. On ne sait pas comment fonctionne la conscience. Donc je prendrai les choses avec des pincettes avant de porter le moindre jugement définitif. J'ai conclu en demandant à Thomas comment il utilise l'IA dans son propre travail. Sa réponse était pragmatique. Il s'agit de synthétiser le flux incessant de contenu publié chaque jour sur l'IA et de filtrer sur ce qui est vraiment nouveau, nous dit-il, de ce qui ne fait que recycler les idées existantes. Derrière lui, lors de l'appel vidéo, on apercevait une photographie prise en Thaïlande de moines bouddhistes. Il a souri quand je l'ai mentionné. C'est un bon rappel que tout n'est pas digital et que tout ne tourne pas autour de la technologie, nous dit-il. C'est la vraie vie qui compte. Pour l'IA et les directeurs marketing, c'est peut-être l'angle le plus utile. La technologie est réelle, la disruption est réelle, l'urgence est réelle. Mais l'inertie des organisations, elle est tout autant, tout comme le rythme du changement culturel et la complexité bien réelle de la façon dont les êtres humains prennent leurs décisions, nouent des relations et construisent la confiance. La loi d'Amara n'est pas un prétexte à l'immobilisme, c'est une invitation à planifier avec soin, agir avec méthode et à résister à la tentation de prendre les annonces pour des résultats. Et maintenant, je vous laisse en compagnie de Thomas Husson pour cette discussion qui s'est déroulée en anglais originellement. Well, I'm here with Thomas Husson from Forrester Research. Hi, Thomas. We're going to talk about Gen AI adoption in European B2B marketing and CMO-CIO collaboration. So, in a nutshell, are CMOs going to disappear?
No, I don't think so. Thanks, Ian, for inviting me. No, I don't think so, because I think marketing can be reinvented through AI. It will be different. The how will be different. The why won't fundamentally change. Marketing is still going to be about understanding your customer, defining a brand strategy, and delivering the brand promise through customer experience. This won't change.
Okay. The job will not change, maybe, but maybe there will be fewer people doing it, though.
Yes, there is a risk indeed that some of the tasks will be automated. Let's be realistic about this. The question is how quickly, what kind of task, and it's not because you automate some task that necessarily you kill a job. Jobs will evolve for sure. New jobs will be created. I think the most important dimension here is that most jobs will change. The way we work will change. The way we work with agencies, with external partners, the processes, the workflow. That's for sure. But I'm don't buy necessarily some of the stats that I've seen about, everyone will disappear and only agents will work. So let's take a step back maybe before digging into that.
We'll get back to this in a moment.
Sure.
And there's certainly something to say about agencies, which are certainly bearing the brunt at the moment. Let's dig deeper into the European Gen AI paradox. For this, you published the Forrester Marketing Survey 2025 about Gen AI adoption in Europe. And your data shows 55% of European B2B marketers consider Gen AI overhyped. Yet 81% of European frontline marketers are enthusiastic about it. So what of it? Do they want it or do they not?
So, I think at a marketing decision maker level and even for most marketers, yes, it's overhyped because everyone is pitching it. You can't go to a conference or talk to someone without an AI reference. There is huge media coverage. There is AI fatigue. And more importantly, some of the vendors indeed are over pitching and the productivity gains and all what they pitch is not happening. So I think that's why there is this idea that it's overhyped. But at the same time, those who have been using AI, and in some cases through shadow AI tools, realize the power of these tools, and they're excited because, yes, I mean, they could do their job differently. They can save some time. And it's also unleashing a new territory. Let's be realistic. The technology is very powerful. There are many things that it could do. The question is, what's the time frame? What are we talking about? And in the short term, as we've been discussing for quite some time, I think everything is overhyped, including the number of job losses. And in the longer term, things are underestimated because AI will be linked to other technologies. And yes, it will reinvent many things, and it's going to be very disruptive, not just for firms, but also for society. And people will work differently. So that's why there is this sort of paradox.
And this is where you introduced the well-known Amara's law on a LinkedIn post recently. And I thought that was particularly apt.
Yes, Amara is the former president of the Institute of the Future, and he had this quote saying, we tend to overestimate the impact of new technology in the short term, but to underestimate their impact in the long term. And it's it's a quote that is often misattributed to Bill Gates. So let's give it back to Amara. And yes, it applies perfectly to AI.
And in this particular case, when Amara was talking about long term, he probably thought about 10, 15 years back in the days. But nowadays, is it 10 years or is it 5 years or is it 2 years?
It's true that the difference with AI is that technology innovation is accelerating like never before. I know we've said this a couple of times in the past 15, 20 years, but really here, this is a bigger shift. So that's for sure. But at the same time, it's when you look at an organization, especially larger organization, there is still some inertia. It's still slow because it's not just about technology. It's about people. It's about processes. It's about workflows. It's about mindsets. And that's why, again, there is this paradox and why Amara's law will be proven right again, I think. So yes, probably closer to 5-7 years than to 10-15, but still not tomorrow.
Okay, that gives us a good time frame to work on. Now, going back to your Forrester State of AI Survey 2025, you state that Europe lacks non-European peers in production use of Gen AI. So that is use of Gen AI in the real life as versus proof of concept. And that's 62% versus 72%. And so why is it? Is it something related to the law?
Not necessarily. I think it's more about the mindset around innovation and how, organization innovate and the US or China are indeed innovating in a different way and probably through shorter life cycles. And yes, there is a dimension around GDPR and the AI Act, but honestly, I think it's used as an excuse for in both ways. For those who are pioneering innovation, they claim that they can't innovate fast enough because of the AI Act, and I don't think it's necessarily true. And we also need regulation. Let's be honest, if we want to stick to our values as Europeans. And at the same time, it's being used saying, let's not execute too fast because there is regulation. So it's a double-edged sword, but no, it's not primarily because of regulation. I disagree with this.
Isn't there a risk that Europe is pinpointed as the whinging group that is always unhappy with innovation rather than embracing things and trying to make do with them and trying to make the most of them?
Yeah, there is a risk. Don't get me wrong. Especially when it comes to AI, there are very, very interesting innovations, thought leaders, experts, data scientists, researchers over here. I think the challenge is more about how you scale this when you are an organization. Do you have the funding, the money you need, and the mindset of thinking global directly instead of, having a narrow-minded perspective on let's tackle France first and the UK next. And then, I think the US firms and the Chinese firms are more ambitious by nature.
Okay. And going back to Europe and your Forrester Marketing Survey 2025, France, the UK and Germany top the list in terms of adoption amongst European countries. So for once, France is not lagging behind. Now, that's good news. Yet there is, you point out, a lack of understanding where to apply Gen AI. So basically, they're using it, but they don't quite know what to use it for.
Yes, that's still the case for a significant percentage of firms. That's because there've been too many POCs, and don't get me wrong, it's important to do test and learn, but at some point you need to align this with a strategy. It's not AI for the sake of AI. Yes, the potential is huge. How do I use AI to serve my marketing objectives? That's the question. That's the only one. and it's also, it needs a bit of understanding because, Gen AI is probabilistic. It's not, deterministic. It's different from predictive AI. So there is a learning curve, but first and foremost, it's about rethink the way you work and about let's zoom and align the use cases with the strategy and let's scale them. Yeah. That's the reason why there are less use cases in production.
Okay, we understand what to do, but it seems like European B2B marketing decision makers still trying to figure out what they should use it for. There's a huge proportion of them, 28% of European B2B marketing decision makers who don't know where to apply Gen AI. So we understand what to do, but how should we get there? And how long is it going to take?
Yeah, it's an issue because you need to define a strategy and you need to embark the organization as a leader, as a CMO. I think it's about let's define the approach. Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to pioneer things and innovate? If so, say so and do what you have to do to make it happen. And if not, that's fine. I mean, you can be a follower, but let's set the right level of expectations so that people internally are not disappointed about it.
Mm-hmm. And when you actually pinpoint a strategy in your marketing survey report, arguing that small targeted AI projects with transparent ROI is the way forward. But isn't that a risk that we're trying to think too small and remain small?
You're right. That's a risk. I mean, to me, this is not necessarily contradictory to the idea of having the right mindset and an ambitious strategy. It is a small targeted AI projects with clear ROI are a way to prove that AI is working and to have a step-by-step approach. But indeed, if you only do that, it's going to be incremental and it's not going to be bold enough. So you need to align it with a vision and a roadmap.
Okay, so small is beautiful, but not in all cases. And here we talk about productivity in your report, State of AI Survey 2025, the dominant driver of AI adoption. Blimey, how do you measure productivity, Thomas? I'm really interested.
Yeah, it's one of the focuses that we touched on earlier about vendors saying you're going to have productivity gains. It's about the link about, how much time you're going to save. There is a direct link between time and productivity, but it's not because you save 2 hours on a day or 1 hour per week that you're necessarily going to be productive, because it depends what you reuse this time for. And in most of the modeling in our projections, when we look at, productivity gains, we apply a 50% factor. So not 100% of the time saved is being, necessarily reallocated. So that's why I think you need to apply a discount to the pitch of vendors when they say you're going to get 40, 50, 80, 100% productivity gains. Reality is there are productivity gains, but they're not as high as one would expect.
And they also depend on how people implement it as well, or whether they tire or not from using it. Because that is an impact as well. I mean, I tend to find that I gain a lot of time, but then the job is far less interesting than it used to be. So my sort of focus on the task is actually lower, and then I get less motivated actually to finish it off, which shouldn't be. But anyway, let's move on to the CMO and CIO San Andrea divide, which is a good old theme of yours. But it seems like the gap has narrowed down a little between CIOs and CMOs this time.
Yes, I mean, if you compare this, with the percentage of CMOs and CIOs that consider themselves strategic partners, there's been a big boost that happened mostly post-COVID because they were forced to work together at some point to digitize their solutions. I think there is still a gap at a team level. So this divide that you're describing is honestly, an ongoing and ever-going debate in the industry. And it hasn't fundamentally shifted. There are still some issues between, IT teams and marketing teams. And AI from that perspective, because it's going to change the way we work, is really this collaboration is both a prerequisite, but also is changing the way we work. So that's why it's still so important.
Okay, so that's good news. These guys are eventually talking to one another. Yet, when I look at your State of AI Survey 2025, I discover that CMOs accounting for AI strategy leadership amount to just 1%. Well, in other words, zilch. So,
yes, that's fair enough. It's actually 8%, about 10%. Let's round things when you look at the business functions in general. What does that mean? It means that in most cases, in the majority of cases, it's the CIO and CTO leading the deployment of AI, which, I mean, is understandable in the sense that, yes, there are data issues. You don't want code to be leaked outside. You need to scale this. So yes, I understand somehow the why, but I think it's a mistake, and the exact same mistake that happened with the digital transformation, because it has to be at the service of first the client and consequently to the business functions that serve them. And there is too big a disconnect between a secure, scalable AI platform and the needs of the marketers.
And that's a top-notch transition for my next question about shadow AI risk. Because obviously when you prevent users from using, they usually do their own thing in, without supervision by the CIO. So we're back. So these, in a nutshell, these guys are talking to one another better than they ever did. But CIOs still trying to run the show, and CMOs are doing their own thing behind their backs. So the more it changes, the more it stays the same.
Yeah, I think that's the big risk with shadow AI, and that will, at the end of the day, widen the challenge for CIOs. I interviewed, quite a few of them recently for this research. And yes, it's both a governance issue and as well the fact that, you need to give the right tools to people. It's not about having one big LLM in a secure platform that you will solve marketers' headaches.
And then, given this landscape, we and looking at the MarTech solutions landscape, we have 2,500 new solutions in a single year been added, while removing 1,211 pre-AI era tools. So to navigate all this, I mean, CMOs really can't do this on their own, can they? So it's really time that these guys partner together.
Yeah, it's very challenging. There are a bunch, and there will be a lot more AI native solutions. They are mushrooming, so you need to make sure that you work with a startup that will be sustainable. So it's very important to challenge their roadmap and their credibility. But same thing with some of the bigger platform and software who claim they can do everything in one platform. I had yesterday a long discussion with, a big bank who had exactly this question, which is not new, about best of breed and, should I integrate this on my own? Should I make or buy? That's an ongoing question. At the end of the day, it's about really challenging what people are saying about AI and really looking at how they execute on it.
Yeah, and well, choosing amongst all these solutions is a real challenge, even for experts, I would say. Right, all this is nice, but let's dig into the heart of the subject, which is the human dimension. Because, like it or lump it, 57% of European frontline marketing decision makers believe AI adoption will lead to job reductions in their teams. Well, okay, 68% say they need to hire new roles, but as Yoshia Bendio mentioned, each time I ask what roles will be created, I get no answer, and neither did I. So what of it? Is it just a red herring?
Well, yes, there will be task automation, and there will be for the tasks that are really for the jobs that rely on automated tasks. Let's be clear, there will be job losses. We see this in some cases in some industries, like, in call centers and in some of the more basic marketing tasks, and some of the jobs in the agencies are already starting to, there have been some clear signs that the industry will be impacted. But it's also more often than not an excuse for, bad decisions, for, firms that have not been managed the way they should have been managed. So today, most of the job losses are not directly attributable to AI. And I think it really needs a more nuanced approach and a lot of reassurance. There will be, I think, indeed, some job creations, and it's difficult to name very specifically what they will be, indeed, because they will happen more likely, if I take a step back, and if 20 years ago I would have told you that people want to become a community manager, you would have said, what are you talking about? What's this job? So same thing around ethics, around managing of agents, around, there will be new jobs, that's for sure. But again, most important is the fact that the way we work will change. And we'll have to work with agents and robots, and we'll have to learn how to.
Okay, so what should I say to my students then?
Well, I think you should teach them the basics of marketing, as we've discussed. They won't change. You should probably infuse a lot more. They should learn about some of the more traditional social sciences, everything that is around empathy and emotion and anthropology, and all these dimensions will get, I think, more importance. Curiosity. I don't know if you can teach curiosity or learn, but you have to be curious if you're a marketer. And I would say, they have to use these tools. They have to learn how to use them so that they can develop their own critical thinking. I would invite you to challenge them so that they challenge themselves.
Yes, exactly what I do. Curiosity, yes, it killed the cat though. Listening to you right now, I'm under the impression that, in fact, we're going back to its traditional stuff, but in fact, the first jobs that will actually bear the brunt are the ones in digital. Is that true?
Yes, probably so, because at the end of the day, when you talk about, agentic AI, agentic commerce and all that kind of stuff, well, you have to have processes and data digitized. And for some of the retailers I talk to who are still delivering, a huge chunk of their business offline, the direct transactions will not be that won't be that huge of an impact. The challenge is more about the discoverability of the products and brands. So there is an impact, obviously, but it's because at the end of the day, AI is in the continuum of digital transformation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions surrounding this discovery of new products and new
Yes.
content as well. So that one is a bit of a gray area. Okay, so the world is changing, probably not as fast as people think, but it is changing. So are they ready?
No. No. Why? Well, I think because yes, it is, I think it's moving fast and really fast. But again, it's not about the technology. It's about the mindset. It's about the culture. It's about the processes. And the firms that I see scaling their approaches are the ones that first think about it as, it's going to be a cultural shift. It's about changing the way we work. And in most instances, firms don't do the right things when it comes to upskilling. I don't need a formal AI training. I need, social learning from my peers, and I need on the job practicing. That's what I need if I really want to understand what's going on.
And that's precisely where another question arises, is how do you get people to learn on the job when you're not hiring them because you actually leave the job to the senior ones?
That's a very, very fundamental question about this sort of iterative process of learning. And it's absolutely fundamental for your students and the new generation that they get a chance to still talk to someone to learn. And yes, that's a big challenge, a social one. And that's why I think, AI is so important from an educational standpoint, both the critical thinking, but also, the social dimension of work. That's absolutely fascinating. And it's really urgent to tackle this. You're absolutely right.
Okay, point well taken. Last but not least, let's talk about B2B. Much of the Gen AI enthusiasm in marketing is driven by B2C use cases. But is B2B immune to that?
Not at all. Not at all. On the contrary, I see lots of innovation with B2B use cases, especially when it comes to content generation. And to personalization, but also in terms of supporting sales with, RFPs and through the whole buying process, which, as you know, in B2B involve quite a few stakeholders. And I think some of the B2B marketers are actually ahead of the curve. Yes, they're not immune at all. Not at all. On the contrary, they're impacted quite a bit.
And there's this belief in B2B that things are a bit different because they rely on practice and, learning things in the field. And obviously, if you don't know your stuff, then obviously you can't talk about it. But is that still true today, or is that less true than it used to be?
It's probably less true, but at the same time, I think B2B marketers are discovering, learning from B2C on things that are obvious to them, like emotion. There's this idea that it's, the emotion dimension is related to B2C brands, but it's not, because there is so much at stake when you make a B2B decision and it's a buying group. That you have more to lose than, a consumer buying whatever, some shoes or apparel. So it's going in both directions, from B2B to B2C and vice versa.
However much I value emotions, I must admit I'm a little bit torn on that issue of telling that humans should devote themselves to emotions and then machines should do the thinking. To me, it doesn't sound quite right. There's something wrong here. We're not just emotional machines, are we? And emotions aren't always positive, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And you can rely, if you need to be cautious about it, but some negative emotions can spark some business benefits. It's rarely the case, but it can happen. So you need a very nuanced approach. And Yeah, I agree. Machines and AI will help also better understand intent and detect emotion. So it's not like sort of human plus AI, blah, 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 kind of bullshit that we hear all the time. I think it needs a lot more, a more nuanced approach. But at the same time, I think it's very important to understand that AI at the end of the day is pretty much about replicating the human brain, but we don't really know how the human brain works. We don't really know how consciousness works.
Yeah.
We don't really know how emotions work. So that's why I would, really take a pinch of salt here and take a step back before making any definitive judgment about, the way the interaction between AI and emotion. It's way, way, way more complex than most people think.
Okay. A point well taken. Let's wrap up and with a final question. How are you using AI as a marketeer?
Oh, I'm using it in many different ways, quite a bit with, summarizing insights that I need to know of. And there is so much being published every single hour on AI that I need my own sort of brain replicated in an agent to decipher what's new, what's incremental to what I know. And I'm using it also from different tools for summarizing information, producing content. But I'm not a marketer myself. I'm more like an analyst, analyzing what's going on, which is why I tend to focus more on the insights dimension than on the content or video production or, these kind of dimensions.
Okay, so useful tool to browse the internet and understand it a little bit better and dig deeper into content. I see behind you a picture of Buddhist monks. And so do you think it'd be time to retreat from the world and maybe cut the cord and then, start pondering about, what we are, where we are?
Absolutely. I like this pic that was taken in Asia, in Thailand many years ago, because it's a good way to realize that you need to step back from, sometime all the technology hype and to really take a different lens at the world. So it's a good reminder that, not everything is digital and not everything is about technology. It's about, real life. That's why I love this pic.
Well, that's a great conclusion. Thank you, Thomas, and talk to you.
Thank you, Yann.
Surtout, n'oubliez pas de mettre une bonne note à ce podcast si vous l'avez apprécié.